This video is sponsored by DistroKid. Even though I've had access to professional studios for the better part of a decade, I'm no stranger to mixing on headphones. In fact, during the pandemic, I mixed a lot of my clients' songs at home in less than ideal circumstances on headphones alone. Over time, and with a lot of trial and error, I developed strategies to effectively mix songs without any studio equipment like studio monitors or a subwoofer. Instead, I just used my laptop and headphones. And surprisingly, I was able to achieve some great sounding results that not only impressed my clients, but also their listeners on streaming platforms when those tracks came out. Chances are, if you're watching this video, you're a DIY music creator that at some point or another has had to mix their music on headphones, and you're probably looking for the best strategies to do so. Don't worry, in today's video, I got you. We're gonna break down 6 tips that are gonna help you achieve better mixes while using headphones. And make sure you watch this video all the way through till the end, because the last tip specifically is gonna make a huge difference, as it did for me when I first learned it. The reality is, in today's music climate, you don't need the best or most expensive gear to achieve a great mix. While it helps, of course, you really just need the right thought process and strategy, and that's what I'm going to help you with in this video here. And when it comes to distributing your music on a streaming platforms, the sponsor of today's video, DistroKid, has your back all the same. They make getting your music on a stores a breeze with their simple interface, and they pass on 100% of the earnings generated from your music directly to you. DistroKid also gives you access to helpful tools for content creation and marketing your release, including hyperfollow landing pages, the Visi video generator, and much more. Other distributors make you pay every time you upload something, or they keep a percentage of your earnings, which ultimately ends up costing you more. With DistroKid, you pay a low annual subscription fee that lets you distribute unlimited music for the year, making it much more convenient and less expensive than the other guys. Millions of artists, myself included, love using DistroKid, and I'm sure you will too. You can save 7% off your first year by hitting the link down in the description below. Thank you to DistroKid for sponsoring this video, and now, back to the content. My first tip, and the best place to start, is to understand the sound of your headphones. Not all headphones are made equal. Each has its own frequency response that can overemphasize or underemphasize certain parts of the frequency range. For example, a pair of AirPods has the following frequency response. Notice that there is more presence in the 1.5 to 5K range, and not as much below 1K or above 10K. Similarly, a pair of Bayer Dynamic DT770 Pros, which is a very popular open back headphone option that you can find in professional studios, has the following frequency response according to the analysis team at DIY Audio Heaven. Notice that overall it's more balanced and has a flatter frequency response than the AirPods, but it does have a noticeable dip around 4 kHz specifically. The truth is, you will never have a perfect listening situation, and no headphone will have the perfect frequency response either. We just want to strive to have an optimal one that we're familiar enough with and will enable us to make good decisions. Therefore, the goal should really be to understand the sound of your headphones and the implications that it'll have on your mixing decisions. That means you need to listen to a lot of music on your headphones and pay attention to how they reproduce the overall sound of songs that you are more familiar with. If it's accessible, I recommend that you check out the frequency response of the headphones that you're using, just like the 2 that I showed you earlier. That way, you're aware of what frequency pockets may be exaggerated or reduced, even if in reality and on other systems they're not. You can usually find this by Googling your headphone brand and model frequency response. A lot of manufacturers will have this information available online. But if not, and the headphone is popular enough, then chances are there's someone else out there who has figured out the frequency response of your headphone and has shared it online for the world to see. Now, for me personally, if I'm using headphones to mix, I'm relying on my pair of Shure SRH 840s, and in fact, I'm on my second pair. I've had these since 2013, and I'm deeply familiar with how they sound and how they translate into different environments. Now, to take it a step further, we can explore the second tip, which is to use reference tracks. Mixing on headphones can distort your perception of balance and spatial arrangement compared to studio monitors. This is because they sit right on your head with a very close proximity to your ears. Meanwhile, in studios and other common listening situations, there's some distance between you and the sound source. I'll talk more about strategies to overcome this in the coming tips, but using reference tracks can help provide some objectivity to what you're hearing. Unless you're intimately familiar with the sound of your headphones, as I mentioned in point number 1, then it may be tricky to know if your bass is too loud or your vocals are too quiet, at least until you compare it to another professional industry track. That means it's a good idea to compare your in-progress mixes on headphones to other industry songs that you know sound great and that are in the same style as what you're working on. This helps you keep track of how mixes translate onto headphones and allows you to maintain balance across frequencies and other mixing aspects. Now, the third tip I want to cover is to not overdo stereo width. As I mentioned before, wearing a pair of headphones is like wearing a set of speakers directly on your ears. And because they're so close to your ear, headphones tend to exaggerate stereo width since the playback is targeted directly to each ear. At least with monitors, there is some distance between them and yourself. And because those monitors are played out out in the open, the sound of the left speaker, for example, could still hit your right ear, even if it's just the reflections bouncing off of the wall. With headphones, this doesn't happen. The sound travels directly to the ear that it's targeted towards. The left side, for example, hears what plays out of the left headphone, and the right side hears what's played out of the right headphone with minimal overlap between them. This directness can be tricky when it comes to making mixing decisions, leading to more exaggerated stereo imaging moves if you're not careful, which can then create problems when translating into different environments. For example, with headphones, you may want to pan something harder because of how it sounds in the headphones, but that might not necessarily translate as well onto speakers or other devices. For that reason, we need to be cautious with using panning and other stereo effects. Me personally, I would prioritize mono compatibility, which is something that I do regardless of what I'm mixing on, which ensures that sounds translate into different environments, especially environments where someone does not have the best stereo image. For example, if you're at a bar that's playing music, you may not necessarily be situated perfectly between two speakers. You might be sitting closer to one over another. Same goes for the car. If you're driving in North America, you're sitting more on the left side and therefore are going to be closer to the left speakers, and therefore you may not necessarily get the most perfect or optimal stereo image in that listening environment. These are of course just a few examples, but the main thing we should do is prioritize mono compatibility and be wary of any panning or stereo imaging through effects like iZotope's Ozone Imager, for example. And just to be clear, I'm not necessarily suggesting that you don't pan anything at all. I'm just suggesting that you're very careful when panning and when using these effects to ensure that they translate effectively into situations that are not directly cupped to your head. And that leads us to the fourth tip, which is to watch out for low end. Exaggerated stereo image is not the only challenge you're going to face when mixing on headphones. The other one is actually going to be bass response. Headphones often don't provide the same level of bass response as studio monitors, and that can lead us to an inaccurate perception of low frequencies in particular. Now, aside from getting used to the headphones as I mentioned in the first tip, and referencing as I mentioned in the second tip, you can also use visual aids such as the Waves PAS Analyzer to monitor your bass levels and ensure they're in the right place, especially in comparison to reference tracks. Another helpful tool for this is iZotope's Tonal Balance Control 2, which allows you to set the genre and provides a visual indicator of where your low, mid, and high levels should be reaching relative to other industry tracks. These are a few examples, but metering effectively, combined with the other strategies and tools that I've mentioned, can definitely help you find a better balance for your low end so it isn't lacking, but also isn't overdone, which is something I typically find happens when mixing in headphones for me. Speaking of overdone, the fifth tip that I have for you is to avoid ear fatigue. Because of that close proximity to your ear, headphones can cause ear fatigue much faster than listening on monitors. Ear fatigue makes it harder for you to accurately judge your mix and make decisions. And if you aren't careful, you can actually make a bunch of decisions that don't serve you or the track that you're working on, leading to time wasted and an overall inferior sounding mix. There are two solutions I can provide here. The first is when mixing on headphones, listen at a lower level than you typically would. That way you can delay and reduce the onset of that ear fatigue from happening. And the second solution, and perhaps the more obvious one, is to take frequent breaks to reset your ears and come back with a fresh perspective. While you may want to just champ through a mix and get it done, none of that matters if the end product sounds bad and leads you to wasting time. I know for me personally, regardless of if I'm mixing on headphones or studio monitors, I try not to mix for more than 2 hours at a time. In fact, I divide all of my mixing into 3 key phases. Phase 1 is mixing the instrumental, phase 2 is mixing the vocal, and phase 3 is fine-tuning and mastering. I find that dividing it in this way and following this schedule actually helps me reduce the amount of time that I spend mixing, improves the quality of the decisions that I'm making, especially since I'm coming back with a fresh perspective every time, and overall leads to better sounding mixes that go on to impress my listeners. Not to mention it avoids ear fatigue altogether. And that leads us to my final tip, which is to calibrate your headphones. As I mentioned earlier, every pair of headphones has its own unique frequency response curve, which might not be neutral and can skew your mix. We can use tools like SonarWorks Sound ID Reference, Steven Slate VSX, or Waves NX to calibrate headphones and simulate the sound of mixing on flat studio monitors, helping achieve a more accurate mix. These tools will essentially alter the EQ curve of the headphones that you're using and help place you into a realistic space that will enable you to make better decisions. Almost as if you weren't mixing on headphones at all, and instead within a professional studio or even on studio monitors. Yes, these tools come with a fee, but a lot of them are low-cost, one-time purchases that will help make your music sound better and help you make better mixing decisions that translate into different environments outside of the headphones that you're mixing on. And if you want to freeze solution, well, here's actually a big tip that changed the way I mix on headphones specifically. But keep in mind, this tip will only work if you're using bigger over-ear headphones like the ones that I use. Now, what I would do is instead of wearing them, I would take the headphones off and place them directly in front of me, usually a couple of feet away from my current listening position. That way, I'm effectively creating some distance between myself and the playback system, being the headphones. From there, I would increase the level of what I'm playing till I could hear the music clearly through the headphones despite the distance. After that, I would actually go ahead and mix my song. In a way, I'm essentially taking my headphones and turning them into a set of speakers. Of course, this isn't exactly the same as a set of speakers, but I found that creating some distance between myself and the playback, rather than wearing the headphones directly on my head with no gap between myself and the playback system, helped me avoid some of the problems and exaggerations that I mentioned earlier in this video. Now, if you've been counting, that's 6 tips, but because you made it here this far, I'm going to give you a bonus one just for sticking it out with me. And that is to reference on different playback systems outside of your headphones. Obviously, if you're mixing on headphones, you're probably doing it out of necessity, just like I was during the pandemic. I couldn't make it to my studio, so instead I stayed home and mixed songs on the gear that I had available, being my headphones, of course. However, as my mix neared completion, I would always listen to it on different playback systems that I had available, namely being inside of my car, off my laptop speakers, off my cell phone speakers, on my AirPods, and even my TV speakers. A lot of these systems are not necessarily the most optimal place to mix from, but they are good reference points to confirm the decisions that I made and also help me uncover other potential issues that I might have missed when mixing on headphones alone. These reference points are also the ones that your typical consumer is probably listening to music on today, so referencing like this can provide a good strategic advantage in order to know how your mix is going to sound in these less than ideal circumstances. This is actually a fairly common practice amongst engineers regardless of what they mix on. I'm still referencing on these different systems today, even after mixing on my studio monitors and subwoofer, if for nothing else than to know what my end consumer is potentially going to be hearing when they're listening on their preferred playback system. And chances are you probably have access to some of these reference points yourself right now, even if it's just your laptop and cell phone speaker. It's better than nothing and using the headphones alone, so definitely try this out on your next mix if you haven't already. Now, getting your mix to translate into different environments is always a challenge, whether you're mixing on headphones or something else. And one key area that could be extra problematic for translation is low end and bass in particular. I recently did a video about 2 affordable plugins that you can use today that are going to help your bass translate across different listening situations, especially those smaller listening devices that can't necessarily reproduce bass frequencies the same as bigger systems. I'll leave that video on screen for you to watch next. I appreciate you guys for watching. If you got value out of the video, please tap that like button blue, and of course subscribe if you're new to see more mixing tips in the future. I'll catch you next time. Peace.
5